The hum of the engines had settled into a steady, almost comforting rhythm when Susan's voice cut through the cabin. "You need to move. Now." It was sharp enough to make Adam's shoulders tense before his mind even caught up. He turned from the window just in time to see the woman looming over his sister, one manicured finger stabbing the air inches from Nancy's face. Around them, the airplane felt suddenly smaller, the narrow aisle crowded with tension instead of people, the Christmas garlands strung overhead swaying gently as if nothing at all was wrong. Nancy remained seated in the aisle, back straight, hands folded over a neatly folded jacket in her lap. Her purple blouse was immaculate, her hair pulled back into a tidy bun that didn't betray even a hint of nerves. She looked up at Susan with a calm, almost curious expression, as though she were being asked a mildly inconvenient question instead of ordered around in front of a full flight. Adam, sitting in the window seat beside her, could feel his heartbeat thudding in his ears. He had flown hundreds of times, but he had never felt a plane hold its breath like this. It was Christmas Eve, and the cabin carried all the signs of it. Small red bows were tucked near the overhead compartments. Soft holiday music played faintly through the speakers, half drowned by the engine noise. Passengers wore sweaters and scarves, some already dozing, others scrolling on their phones, trying to disappear into their own private bubbles. That illusion shattered the moment Susan raised her voice again. "I paid good money for this seat," she snapped, her yellow designer dress catching the overhead light, silver threads shimmering as she leaned closer. "I'm not sitting back there like some nobody." Her tone wasn't just angry, it was practiced, the sound of someone used to getting compliance through sheer force of personality. Adam felt heat rise in his chest. He was 36, old enough to recognize entitlement when he saw it, and this woman radiated it. Still, he forced himself to breathe. Making a scene on a plane never ended well, especially on a holiday flight. He glanced at Nancy, silently asking if she wanted him to step in. She didn't look at him. Her eyes stayed on Susan, steady and unreadable. "I'm in my assigned seat," Nancy said finally. Her voice was even, quiet enough that Susan had to lean in to hear her. "If there's a problem, we can ask the flight attendant." Susan laughed, a short, dismissive sound. "Oh, honey, I am the problem. And the solution. You're moving." A ripple of discomfort moved through the surrounding rows. Adam noticed a man across the aisle lower his magazine just enough to watch. A woman 2 rows up twisted around, her face tight with curiosity and concern. No one spoke. No one wanted to be the next target. Adam leaned slightly toward the aisle. "There's no need to talk like that," he said, keeping his voice low. "We're happy to sort this out, but she's not moving unless there's an actual issue." Susan's eyes flicked to him, scanning him in a way that made his skin crawl. "And who are you supposed to be?" she asked. "Her lawyer." "Her brother," Adam replied. "Well then," Susan said, straightening as if delivering a verdict, "you should tell your sister to stop making a scene." The irony almost made Adam laugh, but he bit it back. He could feel the attention of the cabin pressing in, every whisper and sideways glance adding weight to the moment. He had come on this flight hoping for nothing more dramatic than stale pretzels and a quiet landing. Instead, he was watching a stranger try to bulldoze his sister out of her seat with nothing but volume and confidence. Nancy finally turned to him then, her gaze brief but reassuring. It was the look she'd given him countless times growing up, the one that said she had things under control even when circumstances suggested otherwise. It steadied him more than he expected. "Let's just get someone," Nancy said, gesturing toward the aisle. "There's no reason to argue." Susan scoffed. "Oh, I'll get someone," she said loudly, already waving her hand toward the front of the plane. "Because I am not dealing with this level of incompetence on Christmas Eve." The word incompetence hung in the air, heavy and deliberate. Adam felt his jaw tighten. He noticed Nancy's fingers flex once against the fabric of her jacket, the only sign that Susan's words had landed anywhere at all. A flight attendant appeared moments later, her professional smile faltering as she took in the scene. She was young, her expression caught between politeness and unease, and Adam could almost see her calculating how to defuse the situation without escalating it. "Is there a problem here?" she asked. "Yes," Susan said immediately. She's in my seat. The attendant glanced down at Nancy's boarding pass, then at Susan's. Ma'am, she said carefully, according to this, Ms. Nancy is seated correctly. Susan's lips pressed into a thin line. That's impossible, she said. I specifically chose an aisle seat. I don't do windows, and I don't do middle seats. Fix it. The attendant hesitated, clearly feeling the pressure of Susan's tone and the watching passengers. Adam recognized that hesitation. It was the pause people took when confronted by someone who acted like rules were optional for them. Nancy spoke again, still calm. If there's another seat available that works for everyone, that's fine. But I'm not moving just because someone's upset. Susan's face flushed. Upset? She repeated. You think this is me being upset? This is me being generous. Because if you don't move right now, I will make this flight very uncomfortable for you. Adam felt something cold settle in his stomach. Threats, even vague ones, had a way of changing situations fast. He could sense the flight attendant's discomfort deepen, her eyes darting briefly toward the front of the cabin, as if considering calling for backup. Ma'am, the attendant said, lowering her voice, let's all take a breath. Susan leaned closer to Nancy again, ignoring the attendant entirely. People like you always think you can just take what you want, she said, her voice dripping with contempt. But you need to learn your place. The cabin went utterly still. Adam's hands curled into fists against his thighs. He had heard plenty of ugly things in his life, but something about the way Susan said that, so casual and certain, made his blood boil. He opened his mouth, ready to respond, but Nancy beat him to it. That's enough, Nancy said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried. You don't get to talk to me like that. For the first time, Susan looked surprised. Not offended, not angry, but genuinely taken aback, as if she hadn't expected resistance. The moment stretched, thin and electric. Adam could hear the engines, the faint music, the soft rustle of clothing as passengers shifted in their seats, all of it underscoring the silence. The flight attendant cleared her throat. I'm going to need to ask you both to lower your voices, she said, though her eyes lingered on Susan. If there's still an issue, I can involve the captain. At the mention of the captain, Susan's expression shifted again, this time into something resembling a smile. Please do, she said. I'd love to explain this to someone with actual authority. Susan noticed and laughed. Calling for backup? She mocked. Go ahead. It won't change anything. Nancy didn't respond. She slipped the phone back into her bag and met Susan's gaze once more, her expression serene in a way that made Adam wonder what, exactly. His sister knew that he didn't. The flight attendant nodded stiffly and moved toward the front of the plane, leaving the three of them suspended in a charged quiet. Around them, passengers leaned subtly closer, curiosity outweighing their desire to stay uninvolved. Adam could feel the story writing itself in their minds already, the assumptions forming, the silent judgments. He exhaled slowly, trying to keep his own temper in check. Susan crossed her arms, clearly satisfied with herself. You really picked the wrong day to be difficult, she said. Christmas Eve flights are stressful enough without people who don't know when to step aside. Nancy looked up at her, eyes steady. And you picked the wrong seat, she replied. The words were simple, almost throwaway, but something about the way she said them sent a chill through Adam. Susan snorted, dismissing it as bravado, but Adam knew that tone. It was the sound of certainty, quiet and unshakable. As footsteps approached from the front of the cabin and the murmur of authority drew closer, he realized this wasn't going to end the way Susan expected. The plane seemed to tilt not with motion, but with anticipation. Every eye now trained forward. Adam felt the moment stretch, fragile and charged, like a held breath before impact. Whatever was coming next would decide more than a seat. It would decide who truly held control in this narrow, airborne world. No one aboard understood that truth yet, least Susan. The captain did not appear immediately. Instead, the minutes stretched, thick with unease, as the aisle remained empty and the hum of the plane grew louder in Adam's awareness. Susan stood with her arms crossed, chin lifted, wearing the satisfied expression of someone who believed time itself worked in her favor. Nancy remained seated, composed, gaze forward. as if the confrontation had already slipped to the edge of her attention. Adam sat rigid beside her, every muscle coiled, watching the space where the captain was supposed to emerge. A few passengers shifted, whispering behind cupped hands. Someone 2 rows back cleared their throat repeatedly, the sound sharp with nerves. The faint Christmas music continued, absurdly cheerful, a hollow soundtrack to the tension pressing down on the cabin. Adam noticed a flight attendant near the galley, speaking quietly into a handset, her shoulders stiff, her eyes darting back towards Susan, as though expecting her to explode again at any moment. Susan broke the silence with a scoff. "Unbelievable," she muttered, loud enough for half the cabin to hear. "We're being delayed because someone refuses to cooperate." She angled her body slightly toward the nearest row, as if recruiting an audience. "Some people just don't understand how things work." Adam leaned closer to Nancy, lowering his voice. "Are you okay?" he asked. Nancy nodded once. "I'm fine." Her calm unsettled him more than Susan's aggression. It felt deliberate, controlled, as though Nancy were waiting for a cue only she could hear. Adam searched her face for answers, but she gave nothing away. He glanced back at Susan, who was now tapping her foot against the carpeted floor, the sound a sharp, impatient rhythm. The flight attendant returned, her expression tight. "The captain will be here shortly," she said, attempting reassurance. "Good," Susan replied, "because this is ridiculous." She leaned closer to Nancy again, lowering her voice just enough to feel intimate and threatening. "I don't know what game you think you're playing," she said, "but you're about to lose. People like me don't get told no." Adam's hands clenched. He wanted to respond, to put himself between them, but Nancy raised a subtle hand, stopping him without looking. It was the same gesture she had used years ago during a disastrous family dinner, the silent signal that reacting would only make things worse. He swallowed his anger and stayed still. Susan straightened abruptly as footsteps approached from the front. The captain emerged into view, tall, composed, his uniform immaculate. Conversation died instantly. Even the engines seemed to fade into the background as every head turned. Authority had arrived, and Susan radiated confidence, as though this were the moment she had been waiting for all along. "What seems to be the issue?" the captain asked, his voice calm but firm. Susan stepped forward before anyone else could speak. "This woman is in my seat," she said, pointing at Nancy. I've asked not so politely, and she refuses to move. I expect better handling of this, especially on a holiday flight." The captain glanced at the flight attendant, who gestured subtly toward the boarding passes. He took Susan's first, then Nancy's, scanning both with a practiced eye. Adam held his breath, watching for any shift in the captain's expression. Susan watched too, her smile fixed, triumphant. "These passes indicate that Ms. Nancy is seated correctly," the captain said after a moment. Susan laughed sharply. "That can't be right. Check again." The captain did. His expression didn't change. "It is correct." Susan's smile faltered for the first time. "Then your system is wrong," she snapped. "I don't sit in window-adjacent seats. I don't sit next to strangers who clearly don't belong in premium cabins." A murmur rippled through the plane. Adam felt heat surge up his neck. He looked around and saw discomfort mirrored on several faces, some turning away, others watching with open disapproval. Susan, however, seemed oblivious, too consumed by her sense of grievance to notice the mood shifting against her. "Ma'am," the captain said evenly, "there's no indication of an error here." Susan's voice rose. "Are you seriously telling me to just accept this?" "I'm telling you," the captain replied, "that everyone must remain in their assigned seat unless there's a valid reason to move." Susan stared at him, incredulous. "Do you know who I am?" The question landed like a challenge. Adam felt a flicker of dread. He had heard that line before, always from people convinced their identity alone should bend rules. The captain didn't react the way Susan expected. He simply waited. "That's what I thought," Susan continued, mistaking silence for ignorance. "If you did, we wouldn't be having this conversation." Nancy spoke then, softly but clearly. "This conversation doesn't need to continue," she said. "I'm happy to fly, quietly, if we can all just move on." Susan turned on her. You don't get to decide that. The captain raised a hand. Enough, he said, not loudly, but with finality. Ma'am, you need to lower your voice. Susan bristled. This is unbelievable, she said, glancing around as if expecting support. None came. A few passengers looked pointedly away. Others stared, unblinking. Adam noticed the flight attendant checking something on her device again, her brow furrowed. Nancy, meanwhile, reached for her phone once more, typed a short message, then slipped it back into her bag. Adam caught a glimpse of the screen before it disappeared, but the text was too brief to read. The action felt intentional, timed, as though Nancy were setting something in motion beneath the surface of the chaos. Susan saw the movement and sneered. Still trying, she said. You really don't know when to quit. Nancy met her gaze. Neither do you, she replied. The exchange was brief, almost understated, but it landed. Susan's eyes narrowed, and for the first time, Adam saw uncertainty flicker across her face. She masked it quickly, straightening and smoothing her dress, reclaiming her posture of dominance. The captain turned to the flight attendant. Please escort Miss Susan back to her seat, he said. Susan froze. Excuse me. You've made your point, the captain continued. Now you need to comply. Susan's voice dropped, cold and dangerous. I will not be dismissed like this. The captain held her gaze. This is not a negotiation. The cabin felt electrified. Adam sensed the moment teetering, one wrong word away from something far messier. Susan looked around again, as if gauging the room, perhaps realizing too late that her audience was no longer on her side. You're making a mistake, she said finally, her confidence cracking at the edges. This will have consequences. The captain nodded once. So we're refusing to follow crew instructions. Susan hesitated, then laughed, a brittle sound. Fine, she said. But don't say I didn't warn you. She turned sharply and moved down the aisle, the flight attendant guiding her toward a seat several rows back. As she passed, a few passengers shrank away. Others watched with thinly veiled relief. Adam exhaled slowly, only now realizing how tense he had been. The captain lingered, glancing at Nancy. I apologize for the disturbance, he said. Nancy smiled politely. Thank you for handling it. The captain nodded and returned to the front of the plane. The aisle cleared. Conversations resumed in hushed tones. The engine's steady hum reclaimed the cabin. On the surface, it looked as though the conflict had ended. Adam leaned back, his heart still racing. That was intense, he murmured. Nancy's gaze remained forward. It's not over, she said quietly. Adam frowned. What do you mean? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she checked her phone, reading a new message. Her expression didn't change, but something in her eyes sharpened, focused. Across the cabin, Susan shifted in her seat, casting a venomous glance toward them. Adam met her stare and felt a chill. Whatever satisfaction Susan had lost, she seemed intent on reclaiming it. The plane began its final preparations for departure. Overhead bins were secured. The safety announcement crackled to life. Christmas music faded into silence. Adam felt the aircraft inch toward motion, the subtle vibrations signaling they would soon be airborne. He looked at Nancy again, searching her face. What did you do? He asked softly. Nancy slipped her phone away and finally turned to him, her expression calm but resolute. I made sure the right people are paying attention, she said. The captain's voice carried through the cabin with an authority that instantly cut through the low murmur of conversation. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. Before we push back from the gate, we need to resolve an onboard conduct issue. The words landed like a quiet thunderclap. Adam felt every muscle in his body tighten as heads turned instinctively toward the rear of the plane, toward Susan's row. Susan sat rigid in her seat, chin lifted, arms crossed so tightly that the fabric of her yellow dress creased at the elbows. For a brief second, she looked pleased, as though she believed the announcement confirmed her importance. Adam noticed the way her eyes flicked forward, then toward the surrounding passengers, searching for validation. She found none. Most people stared ahead, faces blank, unwilling to get dragged any further into the unfolding drama. The captain continued, his tone calm but unyielding. During boarding, there was a reported incident involving repeated verbal harassment and refusal to comply with crew instructions. A ripple of unease spread through the cabin. Adam felt the weight of Nancy's presence beside him, still and composed, her hands folded neatly once more. She hadn't said a word since the announcement began. Susan scoffed loudly. "This is absurd," she muttered, not quite under her breath. A few nearby passengers flinched at the sound. The intercom clicked off, and moments later the captain appeared again at the front of the cabin, accompanied by a second flight attendant. They walked slowly down the aisle, their measured pace amplifying the tension. Adam could hear his own breathing, shallow and fast, as the captain stopped beside Susan's row. "Ma'am," the captain said, his voice steady, "I need you to step into the aisle." Susan looked up at him, incredulous. "You can't be serious." "I am," he replied. She laughed, sharp and brittle. "On what grounds?" "I was provoked." The captain didn't argue. He simply waited. The silence stretched, heavy and expectant. Susan glanced around again, her eyes darting from face to face, perhaps realizing for the first time that no one was going to come to her defense. With an exaggerated sigh, she stood and stepped into the aisle, smoothing her dress as though preparing for a performance. "This had better be quick," she said. "I have places to be." "So does everyone else," the captain replied. "Which is why this matters." He gestured toward the front of the plane. Susan hesitated, then followed, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. The second flight attendant remained behind, her posture alert, her gaze sweeping the cabin. Adam felt a strange mix of anticipation and dread. He knew this was the moment Nancy had been waiting for, but he still didn't understand the full scope of what she'd set in motion. From his seat, he watched as the captain and Susan stopped near the galley. Their conversation was low, but fragments drifted back. Words like policy, documentation, and conduct floated through the air. Susan's voice rose, then dropped again, her tone shifting from outrage to something tighter, more controlled. Nancy leaned slightly toward Adam. "Just watch," she whispered. He did. The captain turned, scanning the cabin, and his eyes landed briefly on Nancy. He nodded once, almost imperceptibly, then faced Susan again. "There's another matter," he said. "One that requires clarification." Susan folded her arms again. "Of course there is." The captain gestured to the flight attendant, who handed him a tablet. He glanced at the screen, then looked back at Susan. "Earlier, you claimed this seat dispute was a system error," he said. "However, our records indicate something different." Susan's expression hardened. "What records?" "The lease documentation for this aircraft," the captain replied. The words didn't seem to register at first. Susan blinked. "What does that have to do with anything?" The captain's gaze shifted again, briefly, unmistakably, toward Nancy. "This aircraft," he said, "is operated under a private lease agreement. The primary holder of that lease is Ms. Nancy." The cabin seemed to inhale all at once. Susan's mouth opened, then closed. "That's not funny," she said weakly. "It's not a joke," the captain replied. Adam felt the realization hit him all over again, even though he'd known the truth all along. Hearing it spoken aloud, in this setting, carried a different weight. Murmurs erupted around them. Heads turned fully now, no longer pretending indifference. Phones emerged openly, no longer discreet. Susan shook her head, a sharp, disbelieving motion. "That's impossible," she said. "She doesn't look like—" She stopped herself mid-sentence, eyes widening as she realized how that sounded. The damage was done anyway. A few passengers gasped. Others muttered angrily. Nancy stood then, slowly, deliberately. The movement drew every eye. She stepped into the aisle, her posture relaxed, her expression calm but resolute. "It's very possible," she said. "And very real." Susan stared at her, color draining from her face. "You're lying." Nancy didn't raise her voice. "I'm not." The captain inclined his head toward Nancy. "Ms. Nancy, thank you for your patience," he said. "I apologize that this situation escalated as it did." Nancy nodded. "I appreciate you addressing it." Susan's composure cracked completely. "This is ridiculous," she snapped, her voice trembling now. "So what, she owns the plane? That doesn't give her the right to humiliate me." A murmur of disbelief rippled through the cabin. Adam felt something shift, the balance of power tilting decisively. Susan wasn't angry anymore. She was afraid. The captain's voice hardened. "What gives us the right to act," he said, "is your behavior. Repeated verbal harassment, refusal to comply with crew instructions, and language that violates our conduct policy." Susan's eyes darted around, wild now. "You can't throw me off this flight." "I can," the captain said simply. "And I am." The words landed with a finality that sucked the air from the cabin. Susan's face twisted. "You'll regret this," she said, desperation seeping through her bravado. The second flight attendant stepped forward. "Ma'am, please gather your belongings." For a moment, it seemed like Susan might explode. Her hands shook as she grabbed her bag, nearly dropping it. She looked at Nancy again, hatred and humiliation warring in her eyes. "You think you've won," she hissed. "This isn't over." Nancy met her gaze steadily. "For me," she said, "it is." The flight attendants escorted Susan toward the door. As she passed through the cabin, whispers followed her, some sharp, some sympathetic, most simply stunned. A few passengers stared openly, no longer bothering to hide their reactions. Susan's face burned red as she reached the front, her earlier confidence reduced to a brittle shell. The door closed behind her with a soft but unmistakable finality. For a heartbeat, the cabin was silent. Then someone clapped, tentative at first, then joined by others, until the sound filled the space. Adam felt his chest loosen, tension draining from him in a rush. He looked at Nancy, who was already sitting back down, her expression unchanged, as if nothing extraordinary had happened at all. The captain returned to the intercom. "Thank you for your cooperation," he said. "We apologize for the delay. We'll be departing shortly." The engine's pitch changed, deeper now, more purposeful. The plane began to move. Outside the window, the lights of the runway blurred into streaks of gold and white. Christmas Eve resumed its course. Adam leaned toward Nancy, lowering his voice. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "Yes," she replied softly, "I did." He studied her profile, the calm set of her features. "You knew this would happen." "I hoped it would end sooner," she said. "But some people don't stop until they're forced to."